Hello and welcome back to Behind the Faders, the channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. And if you are interested in this kind of content, then please give me a like or even subscribe to the channel. It's free for you and helps me a lot. So today I want to talk about channel splitting. What does that even mean? Well, it just means you have an incoming signal and you split it onto more than one channel on your desk. Why? Well, most of the time this has been used to separate front of house and monitors. So if you run monitors from front of house, you now have a front of house channel and a monitor channel. And if you think about it, now at this point you may already be able to work out why this can become a lifesaver. And this technique goes way back. When I was starting out in this business, of course still all analog, people were already doing it. Although it was a lot more difficult back then because sometimes you had a desk that had only 16 channels in total, including effect returns and house music and everything. 24 was kind of average, 32 when you were lucky. And also, in order to split channels, you needed an adapter, a Y-split adapter. So one XLR female onto two XLR male. So you could only split as many channels as you had adapters or channels that you could actually kind of spare. So it was difficult. Nowadays, I think 32 is the minimum you will find on a desk these days. I don't think there's desks that have less. And you don't really need the adapters anymore unless, and we come to that. And also there are other cool things you can do with splitting channels, but we'll come to that later. So first of all, how to split. Well, like I said, in the old days you needed adapters. Nowadays you just plug into one preamp and route that preamp to more than one channel. Easy enough. However, now the two channels or the three channels, whatever you use it for, share the preamp and the gain. And some people don't like that. They want completely separate channels, so they still use the adapter. So they have different preamps for the two channels. Fair enough. I really can't see how this is helpful because just imagine the show starts and you find your gain for the front of house channel too low. It could come up a bit. And now you can't use the analog gain because that will also affect the monitors. Okay, but every desk these days has a digital gain on top of the analog gain. So you can use that, or you can use the makeup gain from the compressor. So there's always a possibility to get more level into this channel without affecting the monitors. If you imagine the opposite, the show starts and now your gain is red, it's clipping, it's overdriven. Maybe the singer was holding back for sound check and now it's going full throttle, then you have to bring it down. Of course, this will affect the monitors too, but you will have to bring it down anyway. It's clipping. You have no choice. So I don't really see why it is helpful to have separate gains on these channels, but it's not a mistake. It's just not something that I would do. So what channels should you split? If you can afford it, all of them. Let's say you have a desk that comes in layers of 16, which is pretty common. And you can get away with 16 inputs, then make 1 to 16 your front of house console and 17 to 32 your monitor console. That is pretty convenient because all the instruments are always in the same place, so you don't have to look for them. However, if you do it that way, find a way to label your channels in a way that makes it really obvious whether you are working on the front of house layer or on the monitor layer. You might argue that it should be simple enough to find out what layer you're on. But trust me, if things get busy and you have to move fast, it is really convenient if you can look at a channel and tell if this is a front of house or a monitor channel. If you can't afford to split all the channels or you don't want to do it, because one could argue that most of these channels will probably not even show up in the monitors anywhere, which of course is true, unless maybe you work in a club as a sound engineer and you don't know the band that's coming. Maybe the drummer brings headphones or in-ears, and now he will need every channel on the desk in his in-ears. So be prepared. But if you still don't want to split all the channels or you can't afford to split all the channels, split the vocals. That would be my first priority, because that's the channel that sees the most processing going, I would imagine. So you put a compressor on the front of house channel, you probably have some secret weapon plugins that you want to use, and none of that should be heard in the monitors. So vocals first. Next up in the priority list would be the kick drum for me, especially if you're working with rock or metal bands, because that is another instrument that could sound very different in the monitors than what you need front of house. For example, this kind of attack that you need to make the kick drum cut through a dense mix, most of the time is a way too clicky for the stage sound. So that would be my second item on the list. After that, all acoustic instruments, acoustic guitars, violin, saxophone, whatever comes up. After that, it's a case-by-case decision. I mean, any instrument that has to sound different in the monitors than front of house, you should split if you have the possibility. But apart from splitting between front of house and monitors, there's other options where you can get really creative with splitting channels. For example, I was working with a project for a few years that was a kind of pop project that was fronted by 4 opera singers. And the problem with opera singers is, especially if they're using normal handheld mics and they run a kind of normal pop show, so they talk in between songs, their speaking voice and their singing voice are completely different, like 2 different persons. And there were quite some engineers before me who tried to kind of handle it with one channel and figure out an EQ that would work for both scenarios, which of course you can imagine you end up with an EQ which is somewhere in the middle. So now the talking doesn't sound good and the singing doesn't sound good. Or they will fiddle with the EQ all the time, which is difficult when you have 4 of these. With one singer, maybe, but 4 of them, no way. So I just split those 4 signals into 2 channels each. So I had a set of talking channels and a set of singing channels. And that solved the problem perfectly. Plus, whatever I did to the singing channel, so any plugin that I was used that would sound weird during talking, I didn't have to think of what to mute and what not to mute. Everything I did to the singing channels was a no-brainer because it would never be heard during talking. It was a perfect solution for that. And speaking of which, I could imagine that being helpful for other genres as well. Just imagine a band like a heavy metal, like Ginger, a heavy metal band where you have a singer that growls and also does clean singing. I imagine it could be helpful to put that into separate channels so you can treat it differently. Maybe it's even been done, I have no idea. I could just imagine this to be a good idea. Or you have a guitar player that plays very different sounds through the same amplifier. You can split it. In fact, I can't remember the band, but I remember one sound engineer who had split his guitar onto like 3 or 4 different channels because he wanted to apply different processing to each of the sound. Or take this a cappella band that I saw, and this sound engineer was taking the voice that did the rhythm, so the beatbox, if you will, and he split that onto 3 channels. So one of these would become his kick drum channel. So that was a high cut at like 100 hertz or so. Then on the next channel, he would carve out the snare area, so he could send that channel even to a reverb. And the 3rd channel would be the hi-hat channel. And I had never heard anything like this. It worked perfectly. It sounded great. So you see, you can get very creative with splitting channels. And I'm sure once you wrap your head around it, you will probably come up with your own ideas of how to utilize channel splitting. So with that said, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.